The cargo bay of the Endurance smelled like rust and old metal. Commander Danny Cole stood at the entrance, his boots heavy on the steel floor, and looked at what the aliens had given humanity. Mountains of broken hull plating, engine cores covered in dust, weapons so old that even the aliens used them only for museum displays. This was the gift. This was what the great Valkyrie Dominion thought humanity deserved. Behind him, Lieutenant Katie Morris let out a long breath. She was a tall woman with short dark hair and eyes that missed nothing. Right now, those eyes were full of anger. "They're laughing at us," she said. Her voice was quiet, but Danny could hear the fire in it. "This is junk. This is what you give to a species you expect to die." Danny did not answer right away. He walked deeper into the cargo bay, his fingers brushing against a piece of hull plating. The metal was cold. There were holes in it where something had punched through long ago. He thought about the Valkyrie ambassador, that tall creature with scales that changed color and 4 mouths that all smiled at once. The ambassador had been so proud when he presented this gift. So generous, so kind. "We give you the tools to defend yourselves," the ambassador had said, his voice smooth like water over stones. "What you do with them reflects your nature." Danny had wanted to punch him. He had smiled instead and said, "Thank you. That was what you did when you were small and weak and the big powers of the galaxy were watching. You smiled. You said thank you, and you remembered." The Endurance was Earth's first real starship. It had taken humanity 50 years to build it. 50 years of work, of dreams, of hope. And when they finally reached the stars, they found that the galaxy was already full. Thousands of species, hundreds of empires. And all of them looked at humanity the way a grown man looks at a child trying to lift a heavy box. Cute. Harmless. Not worth worrying about. The Valkyrie were one of the oldest species in the galaxy. They had been traveling between stars when humans were still living in caves. Their ships were beautiful, fast, and deadly. Their technology was so advanced that human scientists could barely understand it, and they had decided, in their great wisdom, to help the poor humans. This was their help. Scrap metal and broken dreams. Katie walked up beside Danny. She picked up a small device from a pile of junk and turned it over in her hands. It looked like a power cell of some kind. But the casing was cracked, and the lights inside were dead. "What are we supposed to do with this?" she asked. "Build a fence?" Danny took the device from her. He looked at it for a long moment. His father had been a mechanic back in Detroit. His grandfather, too. 3 generations of Coles who could take a broken engine and make it sing again. They had a saying in his family. "There is no such thing as garbage. Only parts you have not found a use for yet." "We learn," Danny said. "We study every piece of this junk. We figure out how it works. And then, we make it better." Katie looked at him like he had lost his mind. "Better? Danny, this stuff is 300 years out of date. The Valkyrie probably pulled it from a trash heap." "Probably," Danny agreed. "But 300 years ago, this was the best technology in the galaxy. It beat everything else. It won wars, it built empires. The Valkyrie moved on to better things, but the principles are still there. The science is still there. We just have to find it." He put the power cell in his pocket. Around them, drones were cataloging the scrap, taking pictures, making lists. Somewhere back on Earth, scientists were waiting to study every piece. Danny had already sent them a message. Do not throw anything away. Not one bolt, not one wire. Everything had value. Everything could teach them something. The trip back to Earth took 3 weeks. Danny spent most of that time in the cargo bay, sorting through the alien junk. Katie thought he was crazy, but she helped anyway. That was the kind of officer she was. She might think you were wrong, but she would stand beside you until you proved it. They found some interesting things. Engine parts that used principles human scientists had only theorized about. Hull plating made from alloys that Earth had never seen. Weapons that were old and weak by galactic standards but still more powerful than anything humanity had ever built. It was like finding a box of toys that a rich child had thrown away. Old toys, broken toys, but toys that a poor child could still play with. When they landed on Earth, the news was already spreading. The great Valkyrie had given humanity a gift. The politicians were calling it a new era of cooperation. The scientists were excited to study alien technology. Only the military was quiet. They looked at the scrap metal and saw what Danny saw. They saw how little the galaxy thought of them. The United Nations Space Authority held an emergency meeting. Danny was asked to speak. He stood before a room full of generals and admirals and politicians. And he told them the truth. The Valkyrie gave us garbage, he said. They gave us their trash and called it a gift. They expect us to fail. They expect us to die out. Just another species that reached for the stars and fell short. He paused and looked around the room. Every eye was on him. I say we prove them wrong. He pulled the cracked power cell from his pocket and held it up. This is 300 years old. It is broken and useless by Valkyrie standards. But inside this cell are principles that our scientists have never seen. Inside this junk are secrets that could change everything. The Valkyrie think they gave us nothing. I think they gave us a chance. The room was silent. Then Admiral Maria Santos, the oldest officer in the room, stood up. She was 70 years old and had spent her whole life building Earth's defenses. She looked at the power cell, then at Danny. What do you need? She asked. Danny smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who had been insulted and was planning his response. Give me a team, he said. Give me a facility. And give me time. I will turn their garbage into something that makes them choke on their laughter. Admiral Santos nodded slowly. You will have it. That night, in a bar near the spaceport, Danny and Katie shared a drink. The news screens were full of happy stories about alien friendship and galactic cooperation. Danny ignored them. Do you really think we can do it? Katie asked. Turn that junk into something useful? Danny looked at his drink, then at the stars outside the window. Somewhere out there, the Valkyrie were probably celebrating their clever gift. Probably thinking about how pathetic humans were. My grandfather used to say something, Danny said. He said that necessity is the mother of invention. We have plenty of necessity now. Let us see what we can invent. He finished his drink and stood up. Get some rest, Katie. Tomorrow we start building. 3 years had passed since the Valkyrie gave humanity their gift of garbage. On the dark side of the moon, hidden from all eyes, a facility called the Yard had grown from a small outpost into the most important place in human history. Chief Engineer Pete Navarro had not slept in 40 hours. His eyes were red, and his coffee had gone cold hours ago. But he did not care. On the table in front of him was a Valkyrie engine core, taken apart piece by piece. Around him, dozens of engineers worked at their own stations, each one studying a different piece of alien technology. The air was thick with the smell of oil and burnt metal. It smelled like progress. Run the simulation again, Pete said to his assistant, a young woman named Rosa Delgado. She was fresh out of the academy, but she had a mind like a razor and hands that could fix anything. Rosa tapped at her console. Numbers filled the screen. Lines went up and down. After a moment, she looked at Pete. With wide eyes. It works, she said. The modified core produces 3 times the output of the original design. Pete nodded slowly. He had expected this, but it was still good to see the proof. The Valkyrie built their engines to last for 10,000 years. They used safety margins so wide that most of the engine's power went unused. It was like buying a car that could go 200 miles per hour but was locked to only go 50. The Valkyrie never pushed their technology. They never had to. They were rich and powerful, and had no enemies who could threaten them. Humans were different. Humans were poor and weak, and surrounded by species who saw them as prey. They could not afford safety margins. They could not afford to waste power, every drop of energy, every bit of speed, every ounce of strength. mattered. The Valkyrie build for peace, Pete said, picking up a piece of the engine core. They build for the long future. We do not have that luxury. We need ships that can fight now, today, tomorrow. We need power, even if it burns out in 10 years instead of 10,000. He put the piece back down and looked around the room. Every engineer in the yard understood this. They were not building for the future. They were building for survival. In another part of the facility, Lieutenant Commander Lisa Grant led the weapons division. She was a small woman with gray hair and a voice that could cut through steel. Her team had spent 3 years studying the alien weapons, and they had come to a simple conclusion. The weapons were useless. The cannons the Valkyrie had given them could not penetrate modern shields. The missiles were too slow to hit modern ships. The targeting systems were so outdated that they could barely track a moving target. By galactic standards, these weapons were toys, but Lisa had not given up. She had asked a different question. She had asked, "What can these weapons do that modern weapons cannot?" The answer came to her one night while she was eating dinner alone in her quarters. She was looking at the old reactor cores, the ones that were too damaged to be used for engines. They were heavy and unstable and produced far more heat than they should. Any Valkyrie engineer would have thrown them away. Lisa saw something else. She saw bombs. "We cannot beat them in a straight fight," she explained to her team the next morning. "Our weapons cannot match theirs. But we can change the rules. We can make weapons they do not expect." She drew a diagram on the board. A small drone, barely bigger than a human. Inside the drone, one of the unstable reactor cores, a simple guidance system, and a trigger. "When this drone hits a ship," Lisa said, "the reactor will go critical. The explosion will crack through any shield, any armor. It will not matter how advanced their technology is. Physics does not care about technology." Her team looked at the diagram. One of them, a young man named Carlos Reyes, raised his hand. "That is a suicide weapon," he said. "A kamikaze drone." Lisa nodded. "Yes. It is ugly and simple and brutal. And it will work." The first prototype was ready within 6 months. They tested it on an asteroid in the outer system, far from any watching eyes. The explosion lit up the darkness like a new sun. The asteroid was gone. Not broken, not damaged. Gone. Lisa watched the recording of the test over and over. She thought about the Valkyrie ambassador and his 4 smiling mouths. She thought about all the species in the galaxy who looked at humanity and saw nothing but weak prey. "Let them come," she whispered. "Let them come and see what we have made." By year 5, the yard had produced its first complete ship. It was not beautiful. The hull was a patchwork of alien metals and human steel, welded together by hand. The systems were held together with solutions that would make any proper engineer scream. The paint was uneven, and there were dents in the armor that nobody had bothered to fix. But inside that ugly hull was the most advanced engine humanity had ever built. Faster than anything in its weight class. More maneuverable than ships twice its size. And armed with weapons that could kill ships 10 times stronger. They called it the Rattlesnake. Not because it was pretty, but because it was dangerous. Commander Danny Cole came to the yard for the first test flight. He was older now, his hair going gray at the edges. But his eyes were still sharp. He walked around the Rattlesnake slowly, running his hands over the rough hull. "It is ugly," Katie Morris said. She had been promoted to commander now, and served as Danny's second in command. "Yes," Danny agreed. "But ugly things can still bite." He climbed into the ship with a crew of 12 volunteers. They were all young, all brave, all a little crazy. You had to be crazy to fly an untested ship built from alien garbage. The test flight lasted 6 hours. Danny pushed the engines hard, harder than any human ship had ever been pushed. The Rattlesnake screamed through space, changing directions so fast that the crew had to be strapped into special chairs to survive the turns. The weapon systems were tested on empty drones, blowing them apart one after another. When they landed, Danny was grinning. It was the first time Katie had seen him smile in years. "It works," he said. "It actually works." Pete Navarro was waiting for them at the landing pad. He looked tired but proud. Behind him, the yard was already building more ships. The Rattlesnake was just the beginning. "How many can you build?" Danny asked. Pete thought for a moment. "With current resources, maybe one per month. If you can get me more materials, more people, I can do better." Danny nodded. He was already thinking about the future. One ship would not be enough. 10 ships would not be enough. They needed a fleet, a real fleet, strong enough to defend Earth against whatever the galaxy might throw at them. "You will have everything you need," Danny said. "I will make sure of it." That night, the engineers of the yard celebrated. They drank and laughed and told stories about all the problems they had solved. For the first time in 3 years, they allowed themselves to hope. In his quarters, Danny Cole sat alone and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Valkyrie were going about their lives, probably not even thinking about the little species they had given their garbage to. They had probably forgotten about humanity already. That was fine. Danny did not need them to remember. He only needed them to be surprised when the time came. He only needed to see their faces when they realized what their garbage had become. He picked up a small piece of metal from his desk. It was a bolt from the original cargo of scrap, the first piece he had collected 3 years ago. He had kept it as a reminder. "Thank you," he said to the empty room. "Thank you for giving us nothing. It taught us to make something." He put the bolt back down and went to sleep. Tomorrow there would be more work. There was always more work, but for the first time, Danny felt like they were ready for whatever came next. The Kreth did not bother with warnings. They did not send messages or make demands. They simply appeared in the outer edges of human space with 12 warships, each one a mountain of metal and weapons, and began moving toward the colonies. Admiral Greg Patterson received the distress call at 3 in the morning. He was already awake, reading reports at his desk in the command station orbiting Mars. Sleep had become a stranger to him over the past few years. There was always too much to do, too much to worry about. "Sir," his communications officer said, her voice tight with fear. "The colony on Titan is reporting unknown contacts. 12 ships. They are not responding to hails." Greg stood up and walked to the main display. The hologram showed the solar system in blue light, with red dots marking the unknown ships. They were moving fast, faster than anything human, heading straight for Titan and its 50,000 colonists. "What do we know about them?" Greg asked. "The computer says they are Kreth," the officer replied. "A hunting species from the outer rim. They enslave younger species for labor and resources." Greg felt his stomach turn cold. He had read about the Kreth in intelligence reports. They were predators, plain and simple. They saw the galaxy as a hunting ground, and every weaker species as prey. They had destroyed dozens of civilizations over the centuries. Now they had come for humanity. "What forces do we have in range?" Greg asked. The officer checked her console. Her face went pale. 4 rattlesnakes in the carrier. "Defiance, sir." "That is all. 4 small ships and 1 old carrier against 12 state-of-the-art warships." By any measure, it was hopeless. The Kreth ships had better weapons, better shields, and better everything. They could probably destroy the entire human fleet without even slowing down. But Greg Patterson had not become an admiral by running from fights. He had grown up on a farm in Kansas, where you learned early that the world did not care if you were scared or tired or weak. You did the work anyway. You faced the storm anyway. You survived anyway. "Contact the fleet," Greg said. "All hands to battle stations. We intercept the Kreth in 4 hours." The 4 rattlesnakes were commanded by some of the best officers humanity had. Captain Ben Torres led the formation in the Rattlesnake itself. He was a quiet man from Texas who never raised his voice and never made mistakes. Behind him flew Captain Jenny Park, Captain Marcus Webb, and Captain Roberto Silva. They were all young, all tested, all ready, or at least they told themselves they were ready. "Listen up," Greg said over the fleet channel. His voice was calm and steady, the way it always was before a fight. "The enemy outnumbers us 3 to 1. Their ships are bigger, stronger, and more advanced. By all the rules of galactic warfare, we should run away and hide." He paused. In their cockpits, the crews of the human fleet waited. "But we are not going to do that," Greg continued. "We are going to fight. We are going to show these hunters what happens when they come into our home. We are going to make them remember the name humanity." Ben Torres smiled at that. He had heard speeches before, from politicians and generals who had never seen real combat. This was different. Greg Patterson meant every word. "All ships," Greg ordered. "Execute attack pattern Delta. Let us go hunting." The Kreeth commander was named Vrachis. He was old for his species, with scars on his armored skin from 100 battles. He had conquered worlds and broken fleets, and never once faced an enemy he could not destroy. When his sensors showed the human ships approaching, he laughed. "4 small craft and a carrier," he said to his officers. "They must be mad. Or perhaps they wish to surrender." He did not bother raising shields. Why would he? His ships were the finest in the Kreeth fleet. Human weapons could not even scratch his paint. This would not be a battle. It would be an execution. The first sign that something was wrong came when the human ships split formation. They moved apart at speeds that should have been impossible, each one going in a different direction. Vrachis frowned. His targeting systems were struggling to track them. "What is this?" he muttered. "How are they moving so fast?" Before his officers could answer, the first Rattlesnake struck. Ben Torres brought his ship screaming down on the nearest Kreeth destroyer, his weapons firing in a continuous stream. The shots should have bounced off harmlessly. They did not. They punched through the shields like they were not there. They tore into the hull like claws through flesh. The Kreeth destroyer exploded. Vrachis stared at his display in shock. One of his ships was gone. Just like that. Destroyed by a tiny vessel that should not have been able to damage a shuttle. "All ships, raise shields," he roared. "Target those fighters." But the humans were already moving. Jenny Park dove under a Kreeth cruiser and fired a spread of the kamikaze drones that Lisa Grant had designed. The drones hit the cruiser's engines and detonated. The explosion ripped the back half of the ship away, leaving it spinning helplessly in space. Marcus Webb and Roberto Silva worked together, drawing fire from 2 destroyers while the carrier Defiance moved into position. The old carrier was not built for combat, but it carried something special in its launch bays. Boarding pods. The Kreeth had forgotten about boarding actions. Why would anyone board a ship when you could just blow it up from a distance? But the humans had remembered the old ways. They had trained Marines for exactly this purpose. Sergeant Amy Chen led the first boarding team. She was small and fast and utterly without fear. Her squad of 20 Marines crashed into the side of a Kreeth destroyer and cut their way through the hull with plasma torches. Inside, they found confused aliens who had never fought an enemy face to face. The battle inside the ship was short and brutal. Human weapons were crude by galactic standards, but they were very good at killing things up close. Amy and her Marines fought through corridor after corridor, leaving dead Kreeth behind them, until they reached the reactor core. "Charges set," Amy reported over the radio. "Get clear." Her team barely made it back to their pod before the charges exploded. The Kreeth destroyer came apart from the inside, breaking into 1,000,000 pieces of burning metal. The battle lasted 2 hours. 2 hours of fire and death and impossible victories. The humans lost 1 ship. The carrier, Defiance. Her engines were hit early in the fight, and she was dying. But her captain, a woman named Susan Cho, refused to retreat. She pointed her ship at the Kreeth flagship and pushed the engines to maximum. "All hands abandon ship," Susan ordered. Her voice was calm, almost peaceful. "I will finish this." The Defiance hit the Kreeth flagship at full speed. The collision broke both ships in half. The Kreeth commander Vrachis died without ever understanding what had happened. His last thought was confusion. How could this be? How could his mighty fleet be destroyed by primitives flying garbage? When the battle was over, the human fleet had lost 1 carrier and 47 lives. The Kreeth had lost 12 warships and over 3,000 warriors. It was the worst defeat in Kreth history, and it was just the beginning. Admiral Greg Patterson surveyed the wreckage from the bridge of his command station. The debris field stretched for thousands of miles, glittering in the light of the distant sun. Somewhere in that debris were the remains of the Defiance and her brave crew. "Sir," his communications officer said, "we are receiving messages from Earth, from the colonies, from everywhere. They all want to know what happened." Greg was quiet for a long moment. He thought about Susan Cho and her final charge. He thought about Amy Chen and her Marines, fighting hand-to-hand in the corridors of an alien ship. He thought about all the people who had worked for years in the yard, building weapons from garbage, hoping for a chance to prove themselves. "Tell them we won," Greg said finally. "Tell them the hunters came for us, and we sent them home in pieces. Tell them that humanity is done being prey." The news spread across the galaxy within days. Every species, every empire, every power in the known universe saw the recordings of the battle. They saw the tiny human ships tearing apart the Kreth fleet. They saw the boarding actions and the kamikaze drones and the final suicide charge of the Defiance. The Valkyrie ambassador watched the recordings in silence. His scales had gone pale, a sign of deep shock. He had given humanity garbage and expected them to fade away. Instead, they had built a fleet that could challenge empires. "What have we done?" he whispered to himself. "What have we created?" He had no answer. None of them did. The galaxy had changed, and no one knew what would happen next. All they knew was that humanity had drawn first blood, and they were not finished yet. The news of the Kreth defeat traveled faster than light. Within days, every species in the galaxy knew what had happened. Within weeks, the political landscape of 1,000 star systems had begun to shift, and in the great council chambers of the Galactic Accord, uncomfortable questions were being asked. The Valkyrie ambassador stood before the council, his four mouths pressed tight together. Around him sat representatives from 100 species, their eyes fixed on him with expressions ranging from curiosity to anger to fear. The chamber was vast, built from white stone that had been old when humans were still living in trees. It had seen empires rise and fall, wars begin and end, species appear and vanish into history. Now it was witnessing something new. "You armed them," the Selvani representative accused. She was a tall being with silver skin and eyes like black pools. "You gave the humans technology. This is your fault." The Valkyrie ambassador's scales flickered through several colors before settling on a shade of defensive purple. "We gave them nothing of value." "And of five the Valkyrie, and of value," he protested. "Obsolete equipment, broken machinery, scrap that we would have thrown away regardless. What they did with it was not something anyone could have predicted." "They destroyed a Kreth hunting fleet," said the Morven delegate, a creature of crystal and light. 12 warships gone. The Kreth are already screaming for blood. They want to send a full invasion force to human space. "Then let them," another delegate suggested. "The humans surprised them once. They will not surprise them twice." The chamber erupted in argument. Some wanted to help the Kreth crush humanity before they became a real threat. Others wanted to wait and see what happened. A few, very quietly, wondered if perhaps it was time to take humans more seriously. The Valkyrie ambassador said nothing. He was thinking about the recordings from the battle. The speed of those tiny human ships. The weapons that should not have worked. The suicide charge of the carrier Defiance. Humans were not supposed to be capable of any of this. They were a young species. Primitive and weak. They should have accepted their place at the bottom of the galactic order. Instead, they had looked at the bottom and started climbing. On Earth, humanity was not waiting for the galaxy to decide their fate. The United Nations Space Authority had called an emergency session the day after the battle, and they had not stopped meeting since. The world had changed in a single night. Everyone knew it. Director Nicole Perry stood at the head of the conference table, looking out at the faces of Earth's most powerful leaders. She was 60 years old, with gray hair and tired eyes, but her voice was strong. "The Kreth will come back," she said. "That is certain. They are not a species that accepts defeat. They will send more ships, bigger ships, and next time they will be ready for our tactics. How long do we have? Asked the president of the European Federation. Nicole checked her notes. Intelligence suggests 6 months to a year. They need time to gather their forces and plan their attack. We need to use that time wisely. The plan she presented was ambitious. New shipyards on Mars, Europa, and Titan. Recruitment drives for engineers and pilots. A complete reorganization of human military forces into a single unified command, and most importantly, more ships. Many more ships. The yard on Luna can produce 1 Rattlesnake per month, Nicole explained. With expanded facilities and resources, we can increase that to 10 per month. In 6 months, we will have a real fleet. Can we afford this? Someone asked. Nicole smiled, but there was no humor in it. Can we afford not to? The Kreeth are coming. The galaxy has decided that we are prey. We can accept that and die. Or we can fight back. I know which option I prefer. The vote was unanimous. Humanity would fight. Over the next months, the yard expanded faster than anyone thought possible. Chief Engineer Pete Navarro barely slept anymore. But he did not complain. He had spent his whole life dreaming of building ships that could challenge the stars. Now he was doing it. The new generation of human ships was better than the Rattlesnakes in every way. The Copperhead-class destroyers were small and fast. Designed for hit-and-run attacks, the Sidewinder carriers deployed swarms of drones controlled by artificial intelligence systems that could make decisions faster than any living being. And then there was the project that Pete cared about most. They called it the Mongoose, the first human dreadnought. Lisa Grant had moved from weapons development to overall ship design, and she poured everything she knew into the Mongoose. The hull was built from the wreckage of the Kreeth ships they had destroyed, melted down and reformed with human metals. The engines were the most advanced humanity had ever built, based on Valkyrie designs but pushed far beyond their original limits. The weapons were a mix of alien technology and human innovation, capable of punching through any shield in known space. Commander Chris Blake was chosen to captain the Mongoose. He was 34 years old, the son of a welder from Pittsburgh, and he had served on the Rattlesnake during the battle against the Kreeth. He had watched the Defiance make its final charge, and he had sworn that humanity would never be that desperate again. She is beautiful, Chris said when he first saw the Mongoose. He was standing in the construction bay on Europa. Looking up at the massive ship, his executive officer, Lieutenant Commander Megan Hall, stood beside him. Beautiful is not the word I would use, Megan replied. She was a practical woman who cared more about results than appearances. She looks like someone took a bunch of different ships and welded them together. That is exactly what she is, Chris said. And that is why she will win. The Mongoose completed its first test flight 3 months after construction began. Chris pushed the ship hard, testing every system, every weapon, every limit. The ship responded like it was alive, fast and fierce and hungry. When they returned to port, Chris was grinning. The Kreeth do not know what is coming for them, he said. But the Kreeth were not the only ones watching. Across the galaxy, species that had ignored humanity for centuries were starting to pay attention. Some were worried. Others were interested. A few saw opportunity. The Morvani sent a diplomatic mission to Earth. They were a peaceful species, traders and artists rather than warriors. And they had been victims of Kreeth raids for generations. They came offering trade, technology, and an alliance against their common enemy. Director Nicole Perry met with them personally. The Morvani ambassador was a being of shifting light, beautiful and strange. And it spoke with a voice like music. We have watched your species for some time, the ambassador said. We thought you were weak. We were wrong. Nicole nodded slowly. We thought we were weak too. Sometimes it takes a crisis to show you what you are really capable of. The alliance was signed within a week. It was the first treaty humanity had ever made as an equal partner. The Morvani provided resources and knowledge. Humanity provided protection and ships. Other species watched and wondered if they should join as well. The Valkyrie watched too, but they were not wondering about alliances. They were wondering what they had started. The ambassador filed report after report to his government, warning them that humanity was more dangerous than they had ever imagined. His superiors did not believe him. They could not believe that a species they had pitied could become a threat. Back on Earth, Admiral Greg Patterson had been promoted to Supreme Commander of all human military forces. It was a position that had not existed before. Created specifically for the war that everyone knew was coming, he accepted the job with the same quiet determination he brought to everything. "We have 6 months," he told his officers at their first meeting. "Maybe less. When the Kreth come, they will come with everything they have. We need to be ready." In the yard on Luna, in the shipyards on Mars and Europa and Titan, workers labored day and night. Ships came off the assembly lines faster than anyone had thought possible. Pilots trained in simulators that pushed them to their limits. Scientists developed new weapons, new shields, new ways to turn alien garbage into human strength. The galaxy had underestimated humanity. They had looked at a young species struggling to reach the stars and seen nothing but easy prey. They had given them garbage and expected them to fade away. They were about to learn how wrong they were. On the bridge of the Mongoose, Commander Chris Blake looked out at the stars. His ship was ready, his crew was ready, humanity was ready. Let the Kreth come with their hunting fleets. Let the galaxy watch and judge. Humanity had found its place among the stars, and they were not going to give it up without a fight. "Status report," he said to Megan. "All systems green," she replied. "We are ready for anything," Chris nodded. For the first time in human history, that was actually true. They were ready for anything. The only question was whether anything was ready for them. 10 years had passed since the Valkyrie gave humanity their gift of garbage. In that time, everything had changed. Ambassador Laura Kim stood in the center of the Galactic Council chamber, surrounded by representatives from 100 species. She was a small woman with dark hair and calm eyes, but there was steel in her voice when she spoke. Behind her, a holographic display showed the current state of human space. 200 warships patrolled the borders. Shipyards on a dozen moons produced new vessels every month. And at the heart of it all, Earth itself, no longer a backwater planet but the center of a growing coalition. The council chamber was silent as Laura began to speak. 10 years ago, your representatives came to Earth, she said. They looked at our ships and our technology and our people, and they saw nothing worth respecting. They gave us their garbage and called it a gift. They patted us on the head and told us to be grateful. They expected us to fail. She paused and looked around the room. Some of the delegates met her eyes. Others looked away. "We did not fail," Laura continued. "We took your scrap and studied it. We took your broken machines and fixed them. We took your outdated technology and made it better than anything you had. We did this not because we were special, but because we had no other choice. You gave us nothing, and we turned nothing into something." The holographic display changed, showing images of human ships in battle. The Kreth War had lasted 3 years. Wave after wave of hunting fleets had come to human space, each one larger and more dangerous than the last. Each one had been destroyed. The final battle had taken place just 6 months ago, when a Kreth armada of 200 ships had faced the combined human fleet. Only 17 Kreth ships had escaped. "The Kreth thought we were prey," Laura said. "They learned otherwise. Their empire is in ruins now. Their fleets scattered. Their worlds begging for peace. We gave them peace. We are not monsters, but we made sure they understood that hunting us was a mistake they would never make again." The Kreth delegate was notably absent from the chamber. His species had withdrawn from the Galactic Council after their defeat, too ashamed to face the other members. Some said they would recover eventually. Others said their empire would never be the same. Laura did not care either way. She had bigger concerns. "Humanity is not asking for charity anymore," she said. "We do not need your pity or your hand-me-downs. We have built our own fleet, our own technology, our own future. What we are offering now is partnership, real partnership, between equals." She turned to face the Valkyrie ambassador directly. He was the same one who had presented the original gift 10 years ago. Though his scales had grown dull with age and stress, he had watched everything unfold, watched his predictions crumble, watched the species he had dismissed become a power that even the Valkyrie could not ignore. "Our engineers see problems differently than yours," Laura said to him. "We push limits that you would never consider pushing. We ask questions that you stopped asking centuries ago. Imagine what we could accomplish together. Your knowledge and our creativity. Your resources and our determination. We could reshape this galaxy." The chamber stirred. This was not what they had expected. They had expected demands, threats, maybe even declarations of war. Instead, the human ambassador was offering cooperation. The Selvani representative raised a hand. "And if we refuse? If we choose not to partner with you?" Laura smiled. And it was not entirely friendly. "Then, we will continue on our own. We will build our coalition, strengthen our fleet, and find our place among the stars without your help. We have already proven that we can survive anything this galaxy throws at us. The question is whether you want to work with us or against us." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "I suggest you choose wisely." The debate that followed lasted for hours. Some delegates argued that humanity was too dangerous, that they should be contained before they grew even stronger. Others pointed out that humanity had only fought defensive wars, that they had never attacked anyone who did not attack them first. Still others saw the opportunity that Laura had described, the chance to gain access to human innovation and creativity. In the gallery above the chamber, Admiral Greg Patterson watched with quiet satisfaction. He was old now, his hair completely gray and his face lined with years of worry and work. Beside him sat Pete Navarro, who had retired from the yard but still consulted on new designs. Lisa Grant was there too, along with Commander Chris Blake and a dozen other heroes of the Kreth Wars. "Do you think they will accept?" Pete asked. Greg shrugged. "Some will. Some will not. It does not matter. We have already won what counts. We are here, in this chamber, being treated as equals. 10 years ago, they would not have even let us through the door." The vote came as the artificial sun outside the chamber was setting, casting long shadows across the ancient stone. One by one, the delegates announced their decisions. The Morvani voted for partnership, as expected. The Selvani voted against, though their representative looked uncertain. Species after species declared their positions. Some for, some against, some abstaining. Finally, only the Valkyrie remained. The chamber fell silent as the old ambassador rose to his feet. His scales shifted through several colors before settling on a shade of deep blue that signified acceptance. "The Valkyrie Dominion recognizes Earth as a full member of the Galactic Accord," he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried through the entire chamber. "With all rights and privileges therein." It was not an apology. It was not even close, but it was enough. Laura Kim nodded once, her face revealing nothing. Inside, her heart was pounding. 10 years of work, of sacrifice, of blood and fire and impossible victories. It had all led to this moment. Humanity was no longer a footnote. They were a power. That night, there was celebration across human space. On Earth, fireworks lit up the sky above every major city. On Mars and Europa and Titan, workers in the shipyards toasted each other with whatever drinks they could find. On the bridges of warships scattered throughout the solar system, crews gathered to watch the news and cheer. In a quiet room in the human embassy, the old guard gathered one last time. Danny Cole was there, though he walked with a cane now and his eyes were clouded with age. Katie Morris sat beside him, her hair completely white but her spirit unchanged. They had started this journey together, standing in a cargo bay full of alien garbage, and they had lived to see it end. "I never thought we would make it," Katie admitted. "That first day, when I saw all that junk, I thought we were finished. I thought the galaxy had written us off." Danny smiled and reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small piece of metal, worn smooth by years of handling. It was the bolt he had kept from the original shipment, the first piece of scrap that humanity had received. My grandfather used to say that there is no such thing as garbage, Danny said. Only parts you have not found a use for yet. The Valkyrie gave us parts. We found uses for them. He handed the bolt to Katie. She turned it over in her hands, feeling its weight, remembering everything it represented. Keep it, Danny said. Pass it on to the next generation. Let them remember what we built from nothing. Katie nodded, her eyes wet with tears she refused to let fall. I will. Across the galaxy, in a classroom on a Valkyrie world, a young student asked her teacher about humans. She had seen the news, watched the recordings of human ships in battle, heard the stories about the scrap that became a fleet. She wanted to understand. They are unique, the teacher said carefully. His scales flickered with something that might have been admiration or fear or both. Other species see limitations. Humans see opportunities. Other species accept the rules of the universe. Humans ask why the rules exist and whether they can be broken. Are they dangerous? The student asked. The teacher was quiet for a long moment. He thought about everything he had seen, everything he had learned about this strange species that had come from a small blue planet and turned the galaxy upside down. They were given nothing, he said finally. And they made themselves into something. They turned scrap into warships and garbage into glory. The humans have a saying that I think about often. They say that necessity is the mother of invention. He looked at his student, his eyes serious. Humanity has always been very good at being necessary, he said. That is what makes them dangerous. And that is what makes them great. The student nodded slowly, trying to understand. She was young, and the galaxy was vast, and there was so much she did not know. But she understood one thing clearly. The rules had changed. The old order was fading, and at the center of the new order was a species that had been given garbage and turned it into legend. Far away, on the bridge of the Mongoose, Commander Chris Blake looked out at the stars. His ship was patrolling the border of human space, watching for threats that might never come. The war was over. The galaxy had changed, but Chris knew that this was not the end. It was only the beginning. Humanity had proven itself. They had taken their place among the stars. Now they had to figure out what to do with it. Chris smiled and turned to his crew. Set course for home, he said. We have earned some rest. The Mongoose turned toward Earth, its engines glowing bright against the darkness. Behind it, the galaxy stretched out in all directions, full of wonder and danger and infinite possibility. Humanity was ready for all of it. They had been given scrap. They had made it into the most lethal ships in the galaxy, and they were just getting started.